Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. My name is Barbara Grosh, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. I'm really glad to see so many people here tonight, including some names we don't see all the time, so that's great. So the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We don't endorse or work against any candidates or parties. We do lobby on political issues, especially surrounding voting and transparency in government and general clean government kinds of issues. So redistricting is an important topic to us. And so we are here tonight to talk about redistricting at the county level. Probably most of you know that every 10 years after the census, we have to redraw the district lines in order to make the population of the districts equal to each other. So that's the process that the county is going through right now. So they did appoint a redistricting committee in mid-September. They held hearings in mid-October. And we are waiting to see proposed districts. I thought they might have been out by now and we could actually be looking at proposed districts, but that's not happening. So tonight we're going to be looking at the old districts. I'd like to welcome our guest, Tom Ferrazzi. Tom, if you want to come on. So Tom is the former Democratic Commissioner of Elections for Monroe County, and so he has been through the redistricting cycle, what, a couple of times? Or
yes.
Yeah. And so I would like to start, before I turn it over to Tom, I want to give you, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little clip of a video. So this video is called Line in the Street, and it was made by a league member from, I think the Hudson Valley, I forget exactly where, but it's about redistricting in Pennsylvania. So it turns out that the gerrymandering in Pennsylvania in the last round of redistricting was so egregious that the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania brought a lawsuit and managed to get a federal judge to throw out all of the congressional districts. So the clip I'm going to show you is just giving you a little bit of background about the process by which they announced the districts. And it's only about a minute long. So let me share my screen. Okay. So here we go.
That we were shooting for, and that is to have a map that would ultimately be constitutional, legal, and fair, and I believe that's what we've produced here today.
This is how the bill originally was introduced in the legislature in September of 2011. It just says the first district is composed of a portion of this Commonwealth. The second district is composed of a portion of this Commonwealth. They inserted the language at the last day. Here's what the actual final bill looks like. It's just page after page of lists of counties and wards and divisions.
Actual language of districts was not dropped in until 9 in the morning, so the congressional redistricting plan was available for legislators to see, for the press to see, for the people of Pennsylvania to see for only 14 hours before it came up for a final vote in the state Senate.
And I think this plan.
Okay, so let me stop that share. So that gives an idea of just how secretive redistricting can be, and Monroe County is kind of looking that way. They are required by the county charter to announce the districts and then hold public hearings and then submit it to the legislature, but there is nothing that bars them from doing all of that on the same day. And that is our fear, that it's not going to be enough time for people to look at the districts and understand the implications. So before I turn it over to Tom, I have one more little graphic that I wanted to share with people. Find the right place to do that. So this is a view of our current districts. And you can see where they are, and you can see how big some of them are. Those are places where population density is low and how little others are because it's dense. You can see some rather peculiar shapes. I'm fond here of District 20, which runs across 3 towns, but I'm especially dazzled by District 26, which I tried measuring this. So in various places, I got the width of that district was around 1,500 feet, but the length from north to south is 7.2 miles. So that raises a lot of questions in my mind. But the reason I wanted to show this map was that it gives you a sense of what the redistricting needs to do. So if you look over in this left column, you can see what the current population is for each of these districts and what the deviation from the average is. So some districts haven't changed population very much or are still average. So District 1 is looking good, but District 2 is now way too small a population, so that's going to need to increase in size. District 3 is too big, so that's going to have to decrease, and so forth and so on. So there is a requirement that we shuffle space around within Monroe County in order to get back to equal population. So that's going to drive a lot of the process. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Tom to open his mic. And so Tom, you're going to walk us through some details on these current districts. So one of our issues with the current districts is not just that some of them look suspiciously shaped, but we know that some of them divide up neighborhoods, associations, neighborhoods, villages. So why don't you walk us through some of those examples?
Okay. I'm sharing my screen now, and this is much of what you were just shown. It's just a little bit more close in. It's not the whole county because we want to walk through some of the divides that exist out there. And so currently you see a kind of a street map, but then you see the LDs and you see black lines kind of outlining those LDs. And to kind of cover some of this, what we'll do is we'll start and by overlaying on this map neighborhoods in the city. Because we want to take a look. There's been a few neighborhood groups that have raised a voice with or concern with the commission regarding them being split. So I'll add in the neighborhoods at this point, and those will be red lines, and the blue names are those neighborhoods. And I'm going to show you a few examples of where these legislative districts have cut these neighborhoods. Hopefully, I'm trying to give a few minutes to make sure that the maps come up. And the first one I'm going to show you is because one of the most vocal groups was the South Wedge. And if you look at it, you'll see that the South Wedge is broken between the 24th LD and the 25th LD. The 25th LD being on the west side of the river and the 24th LD being on the east side of the river. What happens is if you look at the South Wedge here, you can see that part of it is in the 25th and part of it is in the 24th. And what we're finding is that that's not an unusual circumstance for a number of neighborhoods. We find that to be true in the neighborhood of the arts, where they're divided into multiple election districts. We also find that to be true in LD 26. And I'll try to move the map now and then wait for it to settle. We're going to kind of head north with the map. Okay, I'm going to give it a few minutes to settle. And what you'll discover here is on this map, hopefully the map has come up. What's most interesting is that you take the Maplewood Neighborhood Association, which is here around the center of the map. And if you look for its red lines, trying to kind of bring it all into pieces here, you'll discover that it's actually broken into 3 county legislative districts. 26 comes all the way up into it, 28 comes up from below into it, and believe it or not, 29 basically comes across the river and grabs part of it. So that neighborhood association is divided into 3 county leg districts rather than 1. The next one that if you follow 26 down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to again move more north. You'll find that, and I'll give it a minute to settle. You'll find that Charlotte, which runs all the way to the lake from Lower Maplewood, is divided into 2 county ledge districts, LD 26, which Barbara mentioned earlier, and LD 7. And then those are a few of the examples in the city, and there is a number of them. Like I said, I mentioned the neighborhood of the arts. The other thing that's interesting is this situation doesn't just occur in the city. We're going to go east a little bit here. And so as I move the map east, we go over into Irondequoit and LD 16 and 17. What is interesting is that Irondequoit has 2 very distinct school districts, an east and a west Irondequoit school district, which would seem to be somewhat of a natural divide for that, with some variation, but it was divided north and south rather than east and west, which is again, you try to pick jurisdictional things like school districts, community associations, and or political jurisdictions for that matter. As a matter of fact, the next thing that we're going to go take a look at, and now we're going to continue east and then and a bit south so that we can come into, and I'm moving slowly so as to make sure I get and we'll let the map settle here for a few seconds. And you'll discover that East Rochester is divided into 2 different legislative districts. The small East Rochester legally is both a town and a village, but it's a small entity. And it's divided between 2 legislative districts. Again, a community of interest divided, and the district line goes kind of right down through the middle there in terms of that. Another example, and we're going to head west and we're going to fly kind of all the way across the county. So let's go west here. And what's interesting is Barbara mentioned earlier, the strange configuration of LD 20. And what's really definitely strange about it is that, let's see here, that's the town. Bear with me, but here we go. Okay, there we go. One of the things that we're taking a look at now is the village of Brockport. And it's an LD20 and an LD2. Again, another division, community of interest divided. And so this is some examples. So when we talk about communities of interest being divided, we're not only talking about the city, which it was divided drastically. And we're not going to get into the state lines tonight, but boy, that had some real lines go through the city and cut up communities of interest. But the county ledge cut up communities of interest pretty drastically in the city too. But it didn't hesitate to also go and cut up villages in the suburbs. The other question is were any of these lines drawn with communities of interest in some of the bigger towns? And that would take a lot more analysis, but given what we see here, it really is quite sufficient, I think, to ask the question of the Redistricting Commission to please don't break up these communities of interest. Please try and bring them together and allow them to function with one legislator, since they're really very, very small entities. And I'll be frank with you, that's, I think, one of the reasons Barbara had me on is that's been one of my kind of things that I've been trying to do, is trying to get every one of the governmental agencies that is doing redistricting to pay attention to that a lot closer. I think that's Barbara, is there something else you want me to cover?
I think that's good for the moment, unless anyone asks a question that would.
Yeah, and we can do that. We can go back to this map if somebody has a specific area that they're interested in. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
I see a question here. What about Legislative District 3 in Chi-Li? Do you have anything to say about their district lines? Let's zoom out so we can see that.
Okay, so here we are in Chi-Li. And as you can see, District 3 runs along the top and District 12 runs along the bottom.
So Chi-Li is split into those two districts then?
Mhm. Now there's more density up here. I mean, so it's hard to figure out exactly what they had in mind when they cut these districts. I'm going to take out the roads for a moment because it's kind of a clearer picture. It's hard to figure exactly what the intent was in terms of breaking it down. Now it's a strange line, but I'll be honest with you, that's a creek and they have to go along a natural boundary. So if they don't
Yeah, I
do
was
it,
gonna guess that was a waterway.
yeah, that's a waterway. So
to me, that doesn't look terrible. I don't, like you said, I don't know what was behind it, but it's the dense part of Chi-Li and the non-dense part of Chi-Li. And if they have to divide it, it makes sense to me that it would look something like that.
yeah, I'll bring back in the roads for just a minute, because what happens is when you look at this, you can quickly see the amount of subdivisions probably they're up here versus the spacing down here in terms of where homes are. So, it's kind of something that if somebody brings up an issue like that, I think we do have an obligation to look at it and look a little bit closer, because that's really where we want to see these discussions go.
Okay, so we've got some more questions coming in. Let's take a look at them. So would you kindly comment on District 23 is one question.
23. Okay, let's do this. I think, and to be honest, I think to some degree, 10 years ago, 23 was a product of after 29 and 22 got cut, 21, parts of 21 got cut and then had to grow enough. And I think 23 got some leftovers. If I remember correctly, it stole some stuff from 24, and 24 was pushed out into Brighton, from what I understand, if I remember correctly. But as their commentary probably is that 23 kind of wraps around like this, which in this given situation does look a little strange.
Can you put the town lines on so we can see them?
The town lines, yes, I think town lines are in there too. Hang on a minute. Yeah. Let me see if I can make town lines a different color. I'm trying to make town lines a little bit different colors so you can distinguish the town lines.
Oh, that
There
helps.
we go. That helps? Okay, good. And you can now see the town lines. For example, 24 is broken here between the city and Brighton. That's the town line of Brighton. This is the town line of Henrietta. So.
And we've got a comment here about Henrietta, which is split into 4 districts.
Absolutely. As we said, in that the examples we gave were only a few, and there definitely was a number of areas that really were broken up kind of without regard for the communities of interest.
So you've got Henrietta split into 4 districts, whereas District 5 covers parts of 4 different towns. So,
Yeah.
The weird amalgamation can just go every direction.
Exactly.
So you didn't.
I think, Barbara, just as a point, people can, you can definitely go through a list. We picked a few in the city and a few in the towns that were really evident in terms of village and stuff, and then the cities, community groups and stuff. But you absolutely, these are correct. These statements are very much an indicator of exactly the kind of things that we have found to be very frustrated with.
So you didn't go over Irondequoit, did you?
Yeah, I mentioned the fact that Irondequoit is split north and south rather than
Yeah.
east and west. Yeah.
But maybe you want to zoom in on that and put the streets so we can really get a sense. So that, to me, that seemed very suspicious the first time I thought about it. But when you started showing me this map with the streets on it, and I realized that the east and west division in Irondequoit just might not be feasible as a dividing line, just because the population isn't half and half.
Yeah, it won't be 100% by any means. It won't be an easy do. Then you'll need to kind of figure out you know, how you can, because as you can see, the whole area over in Durand, Eastman Park, and that area there is very, not dense at all. I mean, obviously,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
very little street.
Right.
So, but it's not an easy. In a lot of ways, I don't begrudge commissions that have to do redistricting. In terms of it being, it's not easy. In other words, I don't kind of say, well, this is easy, you can do this. It is hard work. But I think the fact is that most of these commissions, frankly, have good staffs, and they have people that understand the makeup of these communities and can find ways to listen to the voices that are speaking out in these communities, and try to take in considerations these communities of interest that are being raised, or in some regards, maybe to respond back to those people that have raised those issues with the constraints that they have, or the elements of the map that might look strange, but that's due to jurisdictional lines or something. I think that, it's kind of like we've always encouraged a dialogue, not a one-way conversation. And sometimes I think if communities, we're listened to, and then you can come back and you can lay out what you can and can't do, they can then participate in the nuances of how these districts are put together.
So you're saying that if we have time for the public to really see these maps and poke around and see why the lines are where they are, one thing is that they might be able to improve the lines by calling attention to problems that the people who drew them didn't know about. And the other is that they at least become aware of the issues and understand better, maybe feel less picked upon or upset by what they end up with, because there are compromises that are going to have to be made. I played with these maps enough to understand that you can't always put the lines just where you want them, because we don't live just the way with that distribution.
Yes, but I think if people were given the chance, like I said, to participate, that they might come up with some good ideas. And on the flip side is that if in fact we walk through the process with them, or they're allowed to be part of that process, part of that discussion, they then, as you say, can understand some of the challenges in terms of dealing with jurisdictional lines, in terms of dealing with population densities, and those kind of issues, because they do have to meet requirements, as you pointed out in the other map, of population segments, and that is a very exacting science now. The swing on that is pretty limited. You can be 2.5% one way or the other. And
yeah, so somebody put in the question here. So apparently the governor just signed into law that now the variation has to be reduced from 5% to 2.5%.
Well, it's a 2.5% swing up or down. So it's a 5% total swing, but 2%, you can have more than the mean population by 2.5% or less, but that's all. I mean, it's a really tight number.
And this is a tighter number than it used to be?
It has been in the past, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So let's talk for a minute about why it's so bad to divide up communities of interest the way these maps have done in several places. Can you just say a few words about how that affects representation?
Very often what happens is that the voice of those people in these communities of interest that are divided can be very diluted, because what can happen is that where they may have a strong community, if it's divided, they are attached then to maybe communities that have stronger voices than theirs, and thusly they no longer have a voice. I mean, literally no longer have a voice. They have 2, 3, 4 legislators, but those legislators only have a small piece of those communities. And when they're trying to deal with constituencies, they may be overwhelmed by constituencies outside of those areas in terms of what their needs are. And, you want elected officials to listen to their constituencies, but who has the strongest voice? And so very often these communities that are divided can lose out on that on that ear. That they will be heard, but when it comes to the final, that elected official is going to deal with what the majority of their constituency wants. And that may not be in line with what that smaller element or smaller piece of their district is saying. There's also natural boundaries, which are interesting, things like the river and town lines, city and town lines. They can also undermine those interests because of them being smaller and not part of the bigger community. Frankly, it's a bad tactic, and I say the word tactic, and I don't want to be accusatory, but it's a bad tactic because what it does is it almost like protects certain people's interests while diluting other people's interests, and that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that all the voices are heard and they're all heard equally.
So just another thing that I think, if you talk to people who are active in politics locally, and I see that we have several county legislators on our call tonight, so these kind of people tend to know the districts a little bit. They can figure out who represents who and whatnot. But the average citizen in Monroe County has zero idea of what the districts look like and who their legislators are. So to the extent that the districts are drawn according to communities of interest, you might learn that from your neighbors, or you might learn that at your neighborhood association. But if the districts are crazy, so that I've driven through the village of East Rochester, and 1 minute I'm seeing yard signs for one candidate, and a minute later I'm seeing signs for a candidate in a different district, and it just makes it really hard for people to actually learn who their representatives are, because the districts are nothing that they can identify with. Like we all know we're New Yorkers, we feel like Monroe Countyers, but nobody feels like an LD9er or whatever. So just even at the most basic level of making citizens able to comprehend their government, I think that this really messes it up. So imagine a process done. So we've got some rumors here on the quick Q&A. So let me share this one. So there is a suggestion that maybe tomorrow they are going to announce the proposed districts, and then at the county ledge meeting, and then a public hearing will happen immediately after the announcement and without an announcement, but the vote won't happen until the December meeting. So that would give them a whole month in which they could publicize well and work with the public. I mean, they could go have public hearings all around the county and let people get up close to these maps and see what district they're in and who's in their district, and give the kind of suggestions that you're saying that the public would have if they can look at them. You want to say anything more about what you think the ideal process would look like?
I mean, the ideal process is exactly what we've described already, I think quite extensively, and that is, to have had input, draw some maps, put them out there, allow the public an opportunity to provide their input to the map, and then somehow respond back to the public about how their ideas can be integrated into the process, or give them maybe the details of some of the challenges of implementing those particular ideas. And I think then you pass a map, and there are options that the public has available to them relative to that. But I think in a lot of ways, if we could just kind of, and we do have plenty of opportunity here. Legislators are not going to run on these lines until 2023. And so we do have a lot of time, and even the process allows us a lot of time because the charter is very explicit about allowing, a good 6 months, 3 months for the commission to have done its work and 3 months before the legislature has to pass something. So, we do have plenty of time to do that. I really wish we would, we would take the time to try to do this. Right.
So, and we saw how it can be done with the state independent redistricting commission. They held hearings which were well publicized back in the summer, where we could all talk about the old maps and what we do or don't like about them. And they had hundreds of people testifying. And then they came through after the proposed maps were released, and people told them what they did and didn't like about the proposed maps. And I found it really fascinating how interested all the commissioners seemed in the ideas that people were bringing. And people did have good ideas, and they were really asking them questions. Well, but if we did that, wouldn't it affect this? And there was a really healthy give and take, and you could sense that they were learning things they didn't know, and that they were going to take them back and see what they could do to accommodate them. So it is possible.
Yes, I agree.
So the big deal then is whether they are going to hold these hearings suddenly and without publicity, or whether they would let us look at the maps for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before they held the hearings. And then, of course, there's the question of whether they build in any time for a public response to be accommodated. So we saw in that little clip from Pennsylvania that they certainly didn't allow any time to accommodate any feedback from anyone.
Yeah.
They scheduled them so close together. So it would be ideal if it were the committee that we're going to hold hearings all over the district, but I suppose that anyone could convene meetings to talk about the maps, and it doesn't inspire confidence that they would listen. But if we don't give feedback, they won't listen. We know that, right? So could be that every village and neighborhood association and anything that considers itself a community of interest should start making a plan soon. It's hard to do when you don't know when you'll have a map to look at.
Yeah. Well, I think you're very right in the sense that that you do need to speak up, and not, even if in fact you don't feel like you're being listened to. I think it's important that you do speak out and that you make your positions clear, because it's the only way that the community dialogue will happen. And if we have any opportunities at all to affect these maps, even beyond the, whatever process we see going on, we really need to have voices heard so that we can make sure that they take those things into consideration.
Right. So, by the way, they do have an email that you can send them communication at. So redistricting at monroecounty.gov. We'll go there. I can't promise anyone whether they'll actually do anything with the information. But again, you have to speak up, because if we don't, then they can assume that there's no one that's got a complaint. So we've got a comment here from Marvin Stefferson, who just ran as the Democrat in LD3, and he says, although it is drawn reasonably, it's still a majority Republican-friendly design when you watch the district at a canvassing process. So that's an interesting point. One of the criteria that's sometimes used to talk about how fair the districts are is whether the districts are competitive, which can actually conflict with some of the other criteria, right? So if people live in pods of like-minded people, then a nice round, sensible looking district will not be competitive. And it could be that to make a competitive district, you do have to cut up districts, communities of interest, and smush together non-like-minded people, which I've complained about in some cases. Like, my own district, I live in District 9, and I think of us as a very wealthy district, and I was surprised to learn that it goes all the way down to include a trailer park on the side of 441, and that just feels like taking some poor people and putting them where they'll never be heard from again. So if that's what it takes to make a district somewhat more competitive, I don't know if that's,
Yeah.
but there are obviously parts of the county that it's easier to make them competitive than others. And like if you look at the city districts, they're going to be Democratic. They just are. That's how we live.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrat to Republican registration in the city is just so difficult, and no matter what you do there, you're going to run into that situation. And to be honest with you, a number of the communities around the ring of the city, like Brighton and Irondequoit, have become less competitive too, although we see in Irondequoit a switch there. But I don't know if that really is an indication that the Irondequoit is any more competitive, so to speak. But it's really hard sometimes then to have districts that are competitive and without tearing apart, as you said, communities of interest. It really is difficult.
Well, I think sometimes when that goes on, you just get people switching parties from what might be their natural affinity. I see we've got Mike Udelson on here, and I knew him as a Republican for a long time, and now he's a Democrat. So I think, sometimes if you're interested in politics, you just have to be in the party that can win elections in your district. I mean, frankly, some of the office holders in the city strike me as actual Republicans, although they're running on Democratic tickets. So that's another outcome of this kind of thing. So yes, we can mention this announcement that Carbone made, that everything is going to be virtual from here on out. There will be no actual public testimony. You'll just have to email in your public testimony. It didn't even say that they would read it out loud, which they did do at the redistricting committee meetings. That feels like not wanting to hear from the public to me. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
It's an unfortunate situation. Kathy Hochul signed an executive order allowing for that process, but the executive order was pretty explicit in the sense that it allowed it. It didn't say that you had to do it. It just allowed circumstances to do it. And I'm not necessarily sure that that in every case, it really is necessary. In this particular case, it does really hamper the ability for the public to have input at a particular time in which there could be issues that it's very important for them to have input. Not that other times aren't, but this is serious in the sense that this will set in place our legislature for 10 years. And so it's a pretty big hit. So I'm kind of disappointed from that perspective that we've gone to that and haven't tried to work out some way of keeping up social distancing, requiring masks, whatever it is, and yet at the same time allowing people to come forward and speak. Or if you're going to do something virtual, allow an opportunity for people to speak online.
Yeah, that's totally feasible.
You know, it just, and you have definitely a lot of control in terms of not allowing them to go on and on and on and setting a time for them to speak. I mean, you literally can cut them off. So you do have quite a, if you're pretty, quite a hammer to make sure that you maintain control over it. So, you know, why we can't hear from people is beyond me.
And so we've got someone asking here, like, if they did what's predicted and announced the districts on Tuesday night and held the hearings Tuesday night without any pre-announced publicity on that, would that really fulfill the legal requirement? Do you have anything to say about that?
They just have to have a hearing. The charter is pretty clear about that, a hearing. And if they do that as part of the legislative meeting, however that's configured, you know, they will have met what appears to be the requirements. That doesn't mean that, you know, that somebody can't bring a lawsuit. It doesn't mean that, I mean, and clearly, if in fact people are not happy with the district lines, they might lobby the county executive to veto the plan. Because that's another step in the process. The county executive has to sign off on the plan. And so they might reach out to the county executive and ask the county executive to veto the plan. And so there's, I mean, there is other options, but they're pretty demanding from the perspective that you got to go to court, or you've got to get the you know, the next level of government or the next branch of government, not level, branch of government to take steps to try to stop what they're doing.
So then suddenly you need to know all kinds of legal things, like who would have standing to bring lawsuits.
Yeah.
Things that just make the hurdle so much higher than if they would actually just let us have a democratic process and let everyone have their input.
Yeah, it's disappointing. Like I said, it's disappointing because we do have the time and we do have the opportunity if it was given to us. So we would have the opportunity. Well,
I am on the edge of my seat wondering what form they're going to release these maps in. Do you have any concept of what the plan would be there?
I don't know. The redistricting, the state redistricting committee released shape files, which was helpful to people because they could pull them into other programs and look at them pretty quickly. Additionally, unfortunately, in the past, the way most of these plans have been released is in a narrative where they literally do a document that you would read, and it would kind of like be, you know, head north on State Street to Main Street and then go west on Main Street to Plymouth Avenue and then south on Plymouth Avenue to Exchange. I mean, just it's that kind of thing. And so you actually have to read through to draw the map and figure out where the lines all are for each district. And that's traditionally how they've come out in the past.
Okay, that's discouraging to think about. So however they come out, the league will be watching, and we will do everything we can to make the information accessible to people. Let me just look at the questions again. So, you know, we would be happy to participate in meetings with neighborhood associations or villages or any way we can help people to process this information. And if that means we print up big things and get people to stand around and point at things, we'll do that. If we can do it through electronic means where you can zoom in and out, we'll do that. If it means that, how about this, Tom? If they release it all in narrative form, you will transcribe all that into some shape file.
There's a lot of great online redistricting tools, and we can go use those. Certainly, I think the league, at least in my participation with the league, is we will definitely load those up as quickly as we possibly can. Hopefully, within a day or two. I mean, it'll take a lot of work, but I think it's well worth it, because then we have something there to put out to the public so that the public can have some say about it. I mean, that's traditionally what we've tried to do is give the public the opportunity to comment without taking a position one way or the other. But, you know, based on what we've heard already, we know some stumbling blocks that might exist. And certainly if the community needs to speak up on those, then we want to make sure they have the tools they need to do that. And I think that's the plan, is to try to get it loaded up into something that is usable and reviewable, much like the first map you brought up. You know, I think one of those could be loaded pretty quickly, actually.
Right, and so this is where they'll reveal to us whether they actually want people to be able to tell what they're doing, or whether they're trying their best to obfuscate and hide what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think. Oh,
What else I got here?
Coming in. Yeah. So people are talking about what recourse do we have, and what could happen if this really stinks. So the first line of recourse really would be for Adam Bello to veto. And so if they passed it, say at the December meeting of the county ledge, then I'm a little confused. I thought he had 30 days to veto, but somebody.
Yeah, I thought he did too. I thought he had 30 days to veto it. So I'm not sure the December meeting is the, now I'm kind of curious. I'll go back and look again at the county charter. That I'm not sure where I thought I read 30 days. I don't know where the 10 days came from. So
yeah. So now, if he did veto it, you know, there was a time when they would have overridden it, but the dynamics have changed since there's so many people who lost their primaries and seem to be losing their appetite for fights.
yeah, I don't know how that will unfold. And you know, whether that will change things, or if they will somehow be able to override a veto. I mean, and that isn't the end of the line either. I mean, if the public is really upset with this, if community groups and what have you are really not happy with this, then they can, the redistricting requires the allowance of a permissive referendum, which is an opportunity, 15,000 signatures, and it goes on a ballot, and it can't go into effect once that petition is filed, and there's 30 days to pass that petition. Once you pass that petition, it can't go into effect until it actually is voted on. And people get a chance to vote it up or vote it down. So, I mean, there is another step after that if they override Adam's veto.
And there's questions about what happens if it doesn't get settled before December 31st, because the commission contains two lame ducks who won't be back into the county ledge. So if the work isn't done, they Would they start over with a new commission? So we've got Mike Eagleson saying they will likely pass it in a special meeting at least 30 days before the end of the year so they can override the veto. But they need.
So
two-thirds.
Michael then says 30 days too. So, okay.
Yeah,
He's in agreement with us. And a special meeting would be a route they could take. They wouldn't have to wait for the December meeting, certainly.
right. So what happens if somehow it's not complete by December 31st? Would they start again with a new commission, or just they'd have to put new people on the commission?
Yes,
Is that
I mean,
commission bound by what the current one has been doing?
to some degree, I have to be honest with you, I think the commission's work is done once it turns a map over to the county legislature.
Aha, okay.
So if in fact the county legislature says that it's received a map from the commission, I think the commission's work is done.
So,
That's their sole responsibility, is to
right.
create a map and give it to the county legislature.
So if the legislature ever refused to pass the commission's map, then the commission would redraw it and resubmit
Well,
it?
no, I don't think it goes back to the commission. I think the county legislature then decides what to do with those changes. I mean, it
Oh.
falls into their hands.
Gosh, that sounds like quite the free for all, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Okay.
Because the charter is pretty clear that once the commission hands it over, it's in the hands of the county ledge. That's why they then hold hearings on it.
I see. So it's a ledge that holds hearings. So technically they can't announce the hearings until after they've given it to the legislature, because it's the legislature that calls the hearing. So even though it's the same person chairing both of them, that would be the procedure. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that we should say before we wrap up here? So everybody watch your emails from the league. If you're not on our email list, you can sign up on our website. That's lwv-rma.org. And we will probably be announcing what we learn about the process as it happens and what we might decide to do in order to help publicize it and help people give useful input. So before we close, I will mention that we are having another forum this week, because it's great to have 2 league forums in 1 week. We will be talking about the state redistricting process. So that is going quite differently. We have proposed maps. We've been able to look at them. They're hard to get your head around because there's 6 different maps to look at. So we are going to be pulling them up and walking people through them to see the implications of the proposals in order to help people so that they might give some input to the redistricting commission. They are open for input from now until about Thanksgiving, and after that they are going to be sort of in retreat with each other, haggling over lines. So the time is pretty short for that, and that's why we're having these forums so close together. So everyone would be welcome to join us again and look at state maps. Okay, I think I'm ready to close this out, unless you have any last words. Oops, you're muted, Tom.
No, I think we really pretty much covered most all of the elements of how this process works. And I do think we had a good deal of explanations of the community of interest, not just in the city, but in the towns, particularly when a number of our legislators chimed in and other residents chimed in about the things that they had to deal with. So you know, at least people are now looking at these maps a little differently, and whatever comes out, hopefully they'll look at from that perspective.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and I'll look forward to talking more as we learn more. Good night.